What's up everyone? So in this video, we will make a quick summary of what was seen in the mental game seminar on emotions, and we will go over the FAST of emotion. So we're gonna try to break down a feeling or emotion into its typical response, its physical sensation, and also the thoughts that follows the experience of an emotion. So let's do a quick summary of what was seen in that seminar. So now what we can understand about emotions is that they have an adaptive value in dealing with fundamental life tasks. So they serve a purpose, they have a reason for existing. And so basically emotions provide information on what's happening in our life, on what's happening when we're playing poker. So we need to pay attention to those emotions so that we can understand what's happening, what's going on with my situation in the moment. Also, something that we need to remind ourselves of is that there are no positive or negative emotions, only adaptive and maladaptive responses to these emotions. So your ability to respond to an emotion will dictate the value of an emotion. So if I have harmful, unproductive, maladaptive responses, then emotions will be negative for me. But if actually I find productive, helpful, useful responses to emotion, then maybe I'll think that emotions are positive. So what we can understand here is that emotions in and of themselves are neutral. It's our response that will make the emotion either positive or negative. So basically, what kind of response or reaction you want to have to your feelings and emotions. And last thing that we need to be reminded of is that each emotion has unique features. So typically, each emotion will have a different signal. So something that will actually trigger the feeling or the emotion. So there will be an antecedent event, a trigger, something that triggers the emotion and the emotional response. What you'll understand as well is that you probably will have a physiological reaction that is different based on the type of emotion you are experiencing, and also you will probably feel like you need to respond in different ways to different emotions. So we don't have the same emotional reaction to happiness or enjoyment than we have for anger or fear, for example. So depending on the emotion, we'll have a different response to that emotion. And so basically what we can understand from this is that the FAST for each emotion, what it represents, remember, feelings, actions, sensations, and thoughts. So that for each emotion, you have the feeling, so the emotion itself. You have the actions, that will be your reaction or your response to that emotion. You will have some types of physical sensations aligned or associated with that emotion. This is the S, the sensations. And for the thoughts, you will most likely have a certain narrative or thoughts coming with the emotion that you will experience. So this is kind of what the FAST of emotions look like. We're going to come back to this in a little bit. So before we get there, let's take an overview of what emotions might look like if we try to enhance the definition. We try to make emotions productive to our being, to our experience. So as you might have realized by now, I'm a big fan of breaking down complicated concepts and ideas into rules or principles that can be applied in a variety of situations. So here, we're going to try to look at a broad definition and use case for each of the 5 emotions. So if we start with enjoyment here, so what we can understand, or what we can the definition of what enjoyment might be, is that it tells us that we are in the right direction, that we're making progress in whatever we're trying to achieve. So maybe we're experiencing success. So in those situations, you will feel or have this feeling of enjoyment. And so what that tells you, or how you might want to think about enjoyment, is I need to continue doing what I'm doing. So looks like it's working. Enjoyment is kind of a motivational cue to keep going, to appreciate what you've achieved so far, and to be grateful for your success or the things that are working out. So whenever we play well, whenever we make good decisions, let's celebrate those wins. So this is what we can take away from the emotion or feeling of enjoyment. Now let's look at anger. So anger, there's been an injustice. There's an obstacle stopping us from achieving our goals. Could be variance, could be mistakes, whatever. And in those situations, what do you want to tell yourself? Well, you could tell yourself that you need, or I need, to refocus on what I can control, instead of focusing your energy on playing back against a certain opponent or trying to win back your money that you've lost a couple hands ago. So I need to refocus on what I can control. So maybe whenever you feel anger, this is the narrative that you want to use to help yourself. Now let's look at fear. So fear, there's uncertainty, there's risk, there's a danger, there's a threat to our goal. So a threat to something that we're trying to achieve. And so fear tells us to pay attention right now, to focus on what matters, on what is important. So you could almost say thank you to fear, because thank you fear, because you provide me with the energy and attention necessary to perform at my best. So whenever I feel a sense of fear or anxiety, I remind myself this is the time where I need to pay attention. I need to pay attention right now to what's happening, because I have this feeling of anxiety or fear that is coming up. There's something important that I need to do. My performance, I need to play, I need to pay attention, I need to be focused. Now, let's look at disgust. And so for disgust, what we can understand is we're not going in the right direction. We're making bad plays or mistakes that could be preventable. And so I should have done better. I should know better. I could have done better. So watch out for these words whenever you're experiencing disgust, dislike, or self-loathing. Watch out for the words should have or could have. And so disgust is an advocate for change. I need to change something about my approach or my process. So here, something's not working. So let's say you keep misclicking some hands, or you keep timing out on your tables. You will probably start to self-criticize for those mistakes. And that's a sign that maybe you're playing too many tables and you need to cut down on the amount of tables. So here we have an example of we're feeling self-loathing, so disgust towards ourselves, because something's not working. We're doing something that we shouldn't be doing. We're actually regressing instead of progressing. So I need to change something about my approach, my process. I need to change something about my habits. So this is a good indicator that there's something that you need to change in your life. Finally, here let's look at sadness. So sadness, there's been a loss of opportunity or a failure to attain a goal. So think of all the times you busted a tournament where you had a chip lead, or you've made a mistake that cost you your tournament life. So these are examples where you might experience disappointment or sadness. So we might lose motivation and interest for the game after a brutal loss. So what we need to do in those situations, we need to reflect on what's important to us. We need to reconnect with our why. So why do we play poker? Why is it important for us? So remember one of the activity from the first section on self-development, it was about reconnecting with your why. So whenever we feel this sense of loss, of failure, that's a good opportunity to reflect on why we're playing poker in the first place. So that way, you might be able to re-energize yourself and have the motivation to come back and play. So whenever you feel down, you feel a sense of disappointment or sadness, reflect on what's important to you, what kind of goals or purpose you have around poker. this should help re-energize yourself and motivate yourself to keep on going. Now, let's take a moment here to look at a range of intensity for each emotion. So I thought it would be relevant to provide this range of intensity because the more vocabulary we have, the better we are able to express and understand what we're experiencing. So, for example, we're not always experiencing anger. Sometimes it's just a small annoyance. And other times, maybe we are completely furious. So, annoyance, maybe a 2 or 3 out of 10. And being furious, maybe an 8, 9, or 10 out of 10. So, you see how each emotion has a range of intensity going from 1 to 10. So, here's what it looks like for each emotion. So, first we have enjoyment here. It ranges from small pleasure or amusement, so light, playful feeling of enjoyment, to maybe some more extremes like excitement, so powerful enthusiasm, and even ecstasy, like a state of very great happiness, almost overwhelming. So we have the range from, 1 to 10 here in terms of intensity of enjoyment or happiness. Let's look at anger. As I mentioned actually previously, so we have annoyance here on one end. Very mild anger could be caused by a small inconvenience. And on the other end, we have fury. So here we're talking about something that might be more uncontrollable and maybe even lead to some violent or impulsive reactions. And then we have fear here that might range from nervousness, so a small uncertainty, to complete terror. Here we're thinking about an intense, overpowering fear. And then second to last, we have disgust. So it could range from something like a dislike, so a preference for something else or a preference against something. And on the other end, we have loathing, so an intense disgust, typically focused on a person, so sometimes directed toward ourselves. So we can talk about self-loathing in those situations. So you can see how it can go from small dislike to loathing or like intense disgust. And finally, here we have sadness. It could range from something like disappointment, so just when some expectation that we have are not met, to despair or grief. So despair, here we're talking about a loss of hope that a situation can change. So we're losing the hope that we can change something. So this might happen sometimes when you're playing tournaments and you feel like whatever the decision you make, you're gonna lose, or you're gonna lose the hand, or you're gonna lose your all-ins. So you might feel this sense of despair when you're in a downswing and you keep losing hands after hands after hands, or maybe a feeling of grief, which is kind of a sadness over a deep loss. So think about the end of a series, a tournament series, or the end of a long session. Maybe you had hopes, you had expectation that you would maybe like this series would be the series, and so realizing that actually you've lost a lot of money, maybe that might be, you might feel this sense of grief, this sense of loss of the opportunity to maybe win a tournament, win a trophy for a W Coup, for example. So those are examples that just comes to mind on the fly here. So if you'd like more information on emotions or the Atlas of Emotion, I actually highly recommend that you check the website, the Atlas of Emotions, which is basically where I got these examples from. So the examples for the intensity and range of emotion from 1 to 10. So atlasofemotions.com. It was a website created by Paul Ekman, an American psychologist that did a lot of work around emotions. So now that we have better definitions, better understanding of what emotions are, and we also have an understanding of the range of emotions from 1 to 10, we can actually dive into the fast of emotions. So as was mentioned earlier, each emotion has unique features. So a signal, a physiological reaction, an antecedent event, so a trigger, and a response. So the fast for each emotion looks something like this. You have the emotion itself, so the feeling. You have the reaction or the response. You have the physiological sensation. And you have maybe the thoughts that are coming with the emotion. And so the exercise here is to pick one emotion, or you could actually take the time to do each emotion, and you break down your desired response or reactions in those situations. So you try to figure out what kind of actions or reactions you want to have in that situation, the desired type of physical sensations that you'd like to have, or the physical state that you'd like to be in whenever a situation like this arises, or the emotion of anger arises, for example. And then you want to write down some thoughts or narrative that you'd like to have about that emotion. So I'll give you an example here, and it's basically all based on what we've discussed in the past couple of slides here. So you should be able by now to identify the type of emotion you are experiencing in a specific moment based on the information that we've provided earlier. So are you experiencing anger, or is it annoyance? Is it fury? Depends on the intensity of the emotion you are experiencing in a moment. But try to figure out or think about emotions that might be difficult for you to deal with. And that's the starting point. So you pick a feeling, you pick an emotion that you experience in challenging situations. And you should also know why that emotion occurred based on the definitions that we provided earlier for each emotion. So if you feel anger, is it because of a bad beat, a cooler? Is it because you lost against a weaker player? So what kind of injustice or obstacle did you face in that situation? Because that's the definition of anger. And because now you understand why the emotion appeared, you probably can also find an appropriate response in that situation. So this is where the actions come in. So for example, whenever I feel anger, the way I'd like to react in those situations is take deep breaths and focus on making good decisions. So that's what I want to be reminded of whenever I feel anger and I'm playing poker. So that's just one example. And you can also figure out how you'd like to feel in that moment. So this is where we go into the sensations. Remember or compare to how the emotions make you feel, or the emotion make you feel. So remember the body heat map of emotions. So when we're angry, we most likely want to feel the opposite of what anger makes us feel. So whenever we're angry, we feel this built up or pent up accumulation of energy. And so typically what we would want to feel in a situation where we start to feel this volcano inside ourselves is probably try to stay calm and relax, or find that physical sensation of being calm and relaxed, because maybe we're starting to be overly activated. And just to give you a counter example, when we feel sad or disappointed, actually in those situations we're looking to activate ourselves because the emotion is bringing us down. It's removing the energy and the motivation. So in situations where we feel sad or disappointed, we're looking to activate ourselves. But in situations like anger, when we're overly activated, maybe we're looking for sensations of calm and relax. And then finally, last but not least, you can also think about what kind of thoughts or narrative you want to have in those situations. So you can refer to the slide on emotions enhanced that we've talked about earlier. So for anger, if you remember, the narrative was there's been an injustice. So I realize there's been an injustice, and so let's refocus on what I can control in that situation. So that's the narrative that, or the thought that you'd like to have in your mind whenever you feel anger. You remember that this is just an injustice and that you want to refocus on what you can control, and here how what you think about will influence the type of actions that you're going to take. So that's why these two things are really important. And of course, how you feel in that situation. If you're calm and relaxed, there's a higher chance that you will be able to act the way you'd like to act and think the way you want to think. So it's, you see how everything here is interconnected. So if you're able to identify all those cues whenever you feel an emotion, you'll probably or most likely be able to find a productive way to react and feel towards that emotion. So this is what it looks like when you do the fast for an emotion. And again, like I told you, you can do this exercise for each of the 5 emotions, or maybe you want to pick one in particular that you've been struggling with in the past couple of weeks or months. And so what I'll do is I'll provide a summary of the emotions enhanced slide in the workbook with exercise 2.12 here. And that's something that you can practice so that every time an emotion arises, you know how you want to respond, you know how you want to feel physically, your sensations, very important, and you know how or what you want to be thinking about in that moment. Do you want to be frustrated and think about winning your money back, or you want to focus on what you can control in that situation? So on that note, see you in the next video, everyone, and take care. Bye-bye.